Hello and welcome to Bitcoin with Jake. Today we have Bitcoin Sessions, aka Ben. Ben, welcome on the show.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
No, it's an absolute pleasure, and I'm very excited to hear your journey to Bitcoin. So I always start in the same way. If you're able to give us a brief overview as to the projects you're involved in at the moment to kick things off, that would be great.
Yeah. So right now, I do not have a boss. I basically work entirely for myself. I do my YouTube channel, which is called BTC Sessions, and effectively what it is a lot of in-depth, step-by-step tutorials on how to use anything and everything Bitcoin, whether it be wallets or hardware or multi-sig or nodes or Lightning, you name it. I've pretty much covered it. And outside of that, I also have a news show on the same channel, and I have a panel show every Friday called Why Are We Bullish, where lots of Bitcoiners just come in and join and get to rant a little bit about what they're excited about that week. So that is me. I effectively do that full time now, and outside of that, traveling for speaking engagements and stuff like that. It's a lot of fun. I get to do what I love.
Epic. I have to say, Why Are We Bullish is when I first stumbled across your YouTube channel, and there was just a collection of absolute nutters sitting around talking about how incredible Bitcoin was going to be. And I loved it. You're just like, wow. First of all, hats off for collecting. I think there was probably 10 people on the call or 8 people on the call or something. And people dropped in and dropped out. And it was fun. And, some people were drunk, some people weren't. I just thought, this is classic. What's going on here? We'll come to talk a lot more about your businesses and where you're at today towards the end of the conversation. What I'd love to do is rewind and just learn a bit about yourself. So could you tell me, where was home, what was growing up like, and really I want to look at how you came to Bitcoin. Basically, what was the journey that you took?
Yeah. Well, I live in Canada. I was born kind of further east in an area where more people are kind of familiar with, not in Toronto or Ottawa, but the outlying areas in a little town called Brockville on the St. Lawrence River. But I only stayed there with my family until I was around 5 or 6. And then we moved out west to a city called Calgary, which is near the Rocky Mountains. And for those in the US that are trying to place it, it's about 3 hours north of the Montana border, but it's a large city of about 1.3 million people. So it's pretty big. And I've basically grown up here my entire life, and started traveling early on and started kind of exploring the globe. At this point, I've been to around, I think I just hit my 50th country this
Wow.
past year. And so lots of travel. Didn't really have a technical or we'll say financial background in any way, shape, or form when I initially got into Bitcoin. But as I'm sure many Bitcoiners can attest to, it sends you down some interesting rabbit holes when you arrive. So, my early life wasn't, I guess, anything too exciting. But as I got into high school, I was originally very, very shy as a kid. And then kind of broke out of my shell in high school, got into performing, and I sang in an a cappella group. I was in a performance arts school for a while, and then I started teaching dance. In particular, I taught hip hop and breakdancing, in particular, some popping and some locking classes, stuff like that. I did that for quite some time, right out of high school until around 2017 or 16 was kind of when I stopped that. But I basically spent a decade in schools, doing in-school residencies, which would basically replace the phys ed unit, like the dance unit. And it would be me instead coming in for a week and doing hip hop with all of the classes and getting them to learn a routine by the end of the week and then do a performance. So that was kind of my background before I stumbled upon Bitcoin, and it kind of pulled my focus from there.
which happens to a lot of people. Funny, you mentioned being shy. To end up working as a dance teacher seems like the opposite end of the spectrum in a sense, like being a performer.
Mhm.
Just talk me through that process. Like, did you suddenly wake up one day and realize I'm shy, I've got to do something about this? Or how did that whole situation work out?
It was it was a strange kind of transition period of not being super confident in social interactions, and then in around the time I was, teenager, 13, 14, I started to get cautiously more confident in being able to have conversations with people. Still awkward teenager, but more kind of driven to pursue those types of things. And at the same time, I was oddly enough and embarrassingly enough, I was like a closet fan of like boy band songs. So like in that era, it would have been like Backstreet Boys and NSYNC.
Nice.
and so and so I think part of me wanted to be that,
Yeah.
be in one of those groups and
Awesome.
be, yeah. So it was kind of a funny thing that came about, and then I just kind of started to put myself out there. I joined high school choir, and then they had general dance movement incorporated with that. And then when I got exposed to my first hip hop class, I really enjoyed that. It felt more natural than other types of movement, so I gravitated towards that. But I still really liked the vocal, the singing aspect of things, and because I wasn't especially proficient in any type of instrument, I gravitated towards a lot of other people that, again, had some degree of vocal skill, and we decided to form a little a cappella group, and we ended up doing that for about 15 years.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
There's something very uh in a sense basic, but um natural is probably a better word about music.
Mhm.
It makes you move. It does make
Yeah.
you feel a certain way. You can feel like the back of your neck kind of
Hmm.
gets a vibration and something happens. And perhaps that was like, I guess what you felt or something. It's I don't know how to say this really, but it's so interesting to me that like natural instinct leads you in certain directions.
Yeah.
Like you said you were a closet fan. You clearly became a non-closet fan
Yeah. Yeah.
quite
Yeah. Pretty
quickly.
much. I think
um,
I kind of eventually learned to not care what people think, which
yeah,
I suppose that very much set me up to be a Bitcoiner down the line too.
right. Yeah. So that's what I find so interesting. Like everyone's journey to Bitcoin is completely unique. Like you can ask the same 10 questions and you get different answers for all of them from everyone. And that's what I'm only finding now. I'm in the first 10 episodes of this. Um, and that process of like overcoming shyness and then learning, actually, fuck everyone else. I'm just going
Yeah.
to do what I think I want to do.
Hmm.
So do you think that has very much like led into being able to see Bitcoin for what it is? And I don't want to jump too far ahead, but like perhaps you could just talk a bit more to the kind of characteristics that you felt in hindsight you actually gained during that process.
So again, the idea of being able to, I guess, kind of put yourself out there in spite of what you think might be a degree of, I don't know how to put it, that you may get some ridicule
Mm,
for, what you're into, what you think, what your interests are. Especially in high school, I was like, oh God, I'm going to get roasted for listening to and wanting to embody these things. But again, you kind of reach that point where you're like, yeah, who cares? Doesn't matter. So that very much played into it. And then in terms of things that would come up much later on, um, the the act of, and this would play to the dance world, in terms of learning something that I consider to be difficult and complex, only to feel comfortable enough in it years later to be able to break it down and explain it to people myself.
Mm.
That played massively into it, as did a comfort of being able to speak to people, of being able to be on a camera or be on a stage or whatever it may be. All of those things were very integral to finding my niche in Bitcoin, because everybody finds a different niche. Everybody is able to contribute in a different way. It's just a matter of taking your particular skill set, whatever it may be, and seeing how you can make those two worlds collide.
Mm. And absolutely bang on. And that's really what I'm seeing already is, people have spent 5, 10, 15, 20 years working on whatever they've been working on. Some cases longer, right? There's Bitcoiners in their 70s and they go, fuck, this makes sense. And that's what's so interesting, right? Is these personal journeys that people have been on, I feel, help to totally legitimize the decision to adopt Bitcoin. And, to your point, I recently had an interaction with a friend who basically said, your Twitter's embarrassing. All of your mates screenshot it and take the piss out of you behind their backs. You look like you're obsessed. You need to, sort yourself out. And I'm like, oh God, really? And for about a week, maybe 10 days, I was really shaken by this process. And I didn't really post too much. And I kind of like got psyched out by it. And then eventually, perhaps in a similar way to yourself, you go, well, hang on, fuck that. Like, this is way more interesting. And like, I just don't care. You can't, in a sense. You need to just have this kind of faith that you're doing the right thing. And I should add that the first CD I ever bought was Ricky Martin. Sorry, Ricky Gervais, very different.
There we go.
Ricky Martin, Living Da Vida Loca. So I think that's probably fantastic. A similar vibe, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm glad you can own that, because Lord knows I've
great track. I still like it when it comes on. You're like, yep, I bought that a long time ago now. Cool. So let's just dive in a little bit to like this concept of grasping or mastering something complex and then learning how to teach it. Like what was so complex in the dance and performance space that you managed to master, and how did you then teach that to people?
I mean, with the dance stuff, I'm not a natural quick learner in that space. Like, especially somebody would sit down and show me a routine, and the person that's teaching you the routine, depending on who they are and their teaching style, it's a very mixed bag. And some people are very good at breaking things down and getting you to understand the progression, and others are they just do it and they expect you to just learn it. And some people can learn that way. Some people have been able to hone in on that, and whoever the instructor is, you can just copy. But others cannot. And when you're teaching, especially when you're teaching younger kids, you can't just walk in the room and just the dance and you just show it to them and then they just have to copy. That's not how it works. There's a much more nuanced level of explanation that you need for each individual movement. And so, for myself, I felt it in those classes when somebody walked in and just assumed that you had a foundation understanding of a number of things, and they would just gloss things over, and then you'd be lost right out the gate.
It's so frustrating.
Yeah. And I would be lost right out the gate. And so when I got into a class where somebody would take just that moment to say, oh, and in this particular part, to get this movement right, you need to do X, Y, and Z, and then it will look the same as me. Those little tips and pointers and things, I always found, oh, okay, there we go. Now I'm moving the right way. And so I think I kind of took that with me as I started teaching myself. And, it was trial and error. I went through a period of, if regardless of how complex it is, I can just teach it slow enough and then they'll get it. That's not exactly how it works. So you kind of have to tailor your routines and what you're teaching to the audience that you have. Like you're not going to get a group of kids that are 7 years old picking up an incredibly fast and complex routine, no matter how long you teach it to them, because their hand-eye coordination just isn't there yet, unless you get some child prodigy. So when uh, when kind of reaching into that skill set, um, in approaching Bitcoin teaching, I think I was able to kind of look at things and again break them down and pull from my experience of literally explaining things like people are five, because some of the kids I was teaching were indeed five. That translated, not assuming that everybody has that foundational knowledge, and truly kind of deconstructing what is happening and explaining it in terms and metaphors that people may understand. So yeah, that experience of doing that, regardless of the topic, for a decade earlier, really translated once I started teaching things about Bitcoin, because I didn't. Uh, I was doing an Ask Me Anything on Stacker News today, and somebody asked about one of the things that I gleaned, and from instructing all this stuff, and one of my answers was that we need to start teaching people, or we need to start practicing what we preach with low time preference in regards to teaching, right? Because everybody wants everyone to come out the gate and do best practices immediately and well, and cover this whole gamut of information so early on. But what ends up happening is somebody starts down their path, their Bitcoin path, and they get overwhelmed and they just turn around. So you got to think in that low time preference mindset of I have an end goal where I'd like to get this person to a certain point where they understand certain things and they're doing as many best practices as possible. What's going to get you there? Do you need to maybe gloss over a couple things early on? Do you need to give just small tasks and small pieces of information? And if it's not ideal initially, you will get to it eventually, because it's my opinion, and from my experience of teaching for a decade plus, that if you give those small goals that are achievable and attainable in a short time frame, and then you give a new goal and a new goal, then it keeps people more motivated to go down that pathway and actually get down that rabbit hole. Whereas if right out the gate you're like, okay, so you gotta start using Electrum, and you've got to grab yourself a cold card, and you're going to do air gaps transactions, and you're going to learn about privacy, and you're going to, like, it's overwhelming. People have no idea what the hell you're talking about, and they assume they can't do it, but they don't realize that it's coming from somebody who's been in Bitcoin for years and years and accumulated those skills over years, and somebody's trying to give you all those skills in a day. It's not going to happen.
Gosh, so many points I want to touch on here. Which direction do we go in? I guess the overarching feeling I'm getting from what you're explaining is this concept of just meeting people where they're at, and feeling like, how does this person feel? Like actually sitting there and making an analysis of your own and thinking, okay, let's set the end goal. How do we get there? And it's so interesting to hear you, as an education expert in a sense, think about what is the best way to teach people about this incredible technology that we now know is Bitcoin. But equally, like, what difference is that going to make in the future for learning, full stop? So let's dive into that. So very basic level, like, could you give an explanation of what low time preference means to yourself, and how that will impact just education more widely as we go forwards?
Yeah. So low time preference, there's a quote that comes to mind, and sorry for a bit of a tangent here, but
no, let's do it.
So I don't have any tattoos, but if I get a tattoo, this is what it'll be. I was traveling with my wife after we got married. We were in northern Thailand for a little bit, and we found a little monastery with a bunch of monks, and there were these really cool, they almost looked like bonsai trees, but regular sized trees, and nailed onto them were all these little wood planks with quotes from different monks. And one of the quotes that directly applies in my mind to low time preference was, "Constant dripping wears away the stone." And so when I hear that quote, what comes to mind is that tiny tiny amounts of effort, tiny movements, tiny actions that have tiny implications over time can make massive changes um, as they compound. And that can be looked at from a positive aspect. So, a good habit over time can compound to create massive benefits for yourself or others around you over the course of your lifetime or over the course of years or generations. On the flip side of that, bad habits over a long time can wear you down and can really cause yourself and people around you and society as a whole harm if left unchecked. And so with low time preference, the idea is your your actions are not reflective of an urgency to have satisfaction immediately. You're putting off satisfaction to the future so that you have a better outcome, or you're putting something off so that you can plan for the future and you can grow and you can build. And and conversely, high time preference indicates a preference to have everything immediately. I need it now, even if it's not best for me, or I want what's immediate to make me happy now, even if it deteriorates my health or my well-being or my financial well-being or whatever it may be. It's a demand for the easiest, simplest thing that will make you the happiest in the moment rather than later on. So low time preference, yeah, basically, how patient are you? How important is quickness when it comes to getting what you want?
And just to add on that, the when you first learn about this concept of hard money and the fact that there now exists a technology which is really a savings technology where you can put your wealth and it's going to be deflationary. So over time it creates more purchasing power rather than currently you get paid by the hour or however you might get paid for the year in salary. Your incentive is, well, in a year's time this is going to be able to buy 10% less stuff. So I'm better off just paying for it now.
Yeah.
And it incentivizes this huge consumerist culture that we have, and for living in the moment, right? There's no point saving because your money's just disintegrating anyway. So it incentivizes this very short-term kind of thinking. And for me personally, this was a huge moment when I started learning about what Bitcoin actually is, and it's radical, right? It's a complete shift away from the status quo financial system, but the implications of it are extraordinary. And in particular, I was looking at it from a sustainability and climate change perspective, having been personally, just to briefly about myself, I was doing some early stage investing in startups, looking at clean technology. So things like solar startups, and they're all premised on outrageous growth, right? You're looking for the Uber of clean tech or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's all very well because some of them will be successful companies, but premised on government regulation. And it doesn't get to the core problem that humans are incentivized to consume today rather than save for tomorrow because the money that we're using is disintegrating over time. And Bitcoin changes that completely. And, education is one area that's going to kind of change as a result. But, healthcare, fitness, how we approach, everything, it starts to seep into everywhere. And that's what's, I think, so interesting about these conversations. What I'd love to do, Ben, is just jump to like when you first came across Bitcoin. And so you're basically a wannabe boy band fella. You've been educating for 10 years and you've done a ton of travel and you're not technical, which is a really cool aspect to this. And you've effectively self-taught and built community around this learning journey you've been on. You probably had a friend somewhere who said, "Oh, mate, get into Bitcoin. What's the deal here?" How did that all play out?
So I always liked. When I say I wasn't technical, I mean I never coded or anything like that. I did have an interest in gadgets. I liked getting the new phone, or and as I say this is pre-Bitcoin, so obviously very high time preference kind of stuff. Oh, I want the newest computer. I'm going to swap out for a new phone every single year or more often than that. But so I would, every once in a while I'd be on websites that would have tech related uh, blogs
Yep.
or articles. And so, Bitcoin would pop up from time to time. And so I think, I saw a few articles through 2013 because there was a pretty percentage wise, there was an insane bull market through that year. So I think I saw an article near the beginning of the year, and Bitcoin was double digits, like low
Mm,
double digits. And
mm,
then shortly later in the year, it was over $100, and I saw another article and thought, oh well, I guess I missed the boat there, whoops.
mm.
And then yet again at the end of the year, that's the blow off top was like $1,200 or whatever it was, somewhere around there. And I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, okay, so what is this? It's either a Ponzi scheme or there's something there.
Mm.
So I started trying to consume content and figure out like what the hell it was and
Mm.
how it worked. And so um, I kind of perused everything that I could. I found some videos. I started to find some of Andreas's early stuff, Andreas Antonopoulos. I found another. It was like I don't even know if it still exists, but it was like a Udemy course.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was like how I learned to stop worrying and love Bitcoin. Although at the time I think it was and love crypto or something like
Mm.
that.
Mm.
But it kind of explained the ins and outs of okay, this is what Bitcoin is and kind of what underpins it, and if it's working, this is how it works. These are some of the things that could go wrong, so look out for this. uh and this is how likely something is or not. But I basically I got a cursory understanding of, okay, well, this is what Bitcoin is, this is what it's trying to achieve, this is how it's different from the legacy system, and here's a laundry list of things that could still be a problem for it in the future. So I got enough of an understanding. It took me a couple of months of kind of digging and trying to find some things where I felt, okay, well, I'll dabble. And so I started, I downloaded Bitcoin QT at the time, which is now Bitcoin Core. Started up a wallet, downloaded the whole blockchain because more or less that was kind of my option at the time. And I found a local exchange online that I could transfer small amounts of money to and get small amounts of Bitcoin back. And I just started learning. Now, immediately after I bought, I think within a week after my first purchase of Bitcoin was when the infamous Mount Gox collapsed. Uh, and so I
Wow.
had already kind of publicly stated to some of my friends, hey, I'm looking at Bitcoin. I'm just curious about it. I started kind of playing with it. And then of course, like a week later, that story drops. Now, I understood that it wasn't a problem with Bitcoin. It was the business itself. It was like basically a poorly run bank. It was a custodian that didn't have good security, and they basically
Yeah.
lost everybody's Bitcoin. I got that. And in reading the articles that were coming out for it, I understood that they didn't get that. And that
You mean, sorry, the journalists that were writing about it, or the bloggers that were writing about it, they didn't understand what had actually happened.
yeah, they didn't
Right.
understand. They basically the by and large the headlines were Bitcoin got hacked and now it's tanking.
It's over.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and so I'm thinking, well,
Suckers.
yeah, they didn't understand. They don't understand what's going on. This is just a poorly run business. It looks bad, but Bitcoin is still working as intended. So I'm just going to continue on my path and keep learning
Mm.
because this seems inconsequential in the long run. Of course, I got the text messages from friends that day. Oh, I hope you didn't buy any of this crap. And,
Yeah.
like it's, oh,
Yeah.
what an
Yeah.
idiot. But I just continued down that rabbit hole. It was baptism by fire because pretty much from the moment I bought it, the next year or so was just an awful bear market. It dropped like 80%. But I just kind of kept trucking. And after about 2 years of perusing and looking for content to learn different aspects of it, how to use wallets, how to use whatever other apps and stuff were out there at the time, I was so frustrated because there's a definite lack of video material, and I'm a visual learner. And
Mm.
so after 2 years, I was like, okay, I'll try my hand at making some content. And I didn't start with educational stuff. I actually started. Um, I, I was talking earlier about kind of combining your skill sets.
Hmm.
And so my initial thought was how can I do something that's in the arts but somehow links to Bitcoin? So the first thing that I ever tried was local events with performance artists, mostly kind of musical acts, and I would put on an event that was effectively a Bitcoin education event, um, while also having live music. And so it would effectively be people buy a ticket. With their ticket, they get X amount of Bitcoin when they get to the door, and you watch a musical act. In between, like all the intermissions, there's Bitcoin education of like how to set up a wallet. There was also a Bitcoin ATM in the venue that you could play with if you wanted to. And then on the wall were images of the bands overlaid with a QR code for each one. So the Bitcoin that you got, you would then tip to the artist that you enjoyed
Wow.
the most or divvy it up. So I called those the Bitcoin sessions, kind of like a throwback to like
Yeah, yeah.
VH1 kind of
Like a gig or
music
whatever.
sessions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and so I enjoyed doing those. They were a lot of fun, but it was clear that this wasn't going to be like an occupation or anything. But then I started dabbling in doing educational videos. So 2016, I started making my first videos. And I just said, okay, well, I'm going to make a tutorial. I feel comfortable enough explaining how to set up a wallet or how to use a Bitcoin ATM. And I'll just make one video a week of whatever topic I feel like covering, whether it be a tutorial or something else. And I started, and I haven't stopped. It's 6 years
Wicked.
later, and there's been, I think it just went past 6 million views across
Wow.
all the videos that are up there and everything. And yeah, here we are. So it took me a while. Again, like it took some tinkering to figure out where I would fit in and how those skill sets would kind of converge. And so I basically had the educational aspect made sense to me. The comfort in front of a camera was no issue, and the
Hmm.
speaking portion of it was no issue. And then I had a minimal knowledge of video editing, which came from some of my earlier travels with my wife. We would
Hmm.
splice together travel videos, and so I figured with those basic skills, I could probably throw together some videos, and that's how it began.
Awesome. The, I mean, again, I got so many questions for you, but what I love is it's very entrepreneurial what you've just
Mm-hmm.
explained. Like you came across a problem that you felt, which was first of all the messaging around Bitcoin was wrong. In that,
Mm-hmm.
well, hang on, the blocks are still being created. The price is obviously tanked. This one business is blown up, but it's still working.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's really cool because you thought for yourself, basically. You looked
Yeah.
at all the information, you said, nah, I disagree. And
Mm-hmm.
in many ways, this steps back to like, not caring about your mates and wanting to be in a boy band. Well, fuck you.
Yeah.
I'm just going to do
Yeah.
it, and it's similar, right? Um, and this is what's so cool is people's characteristics really kind of take them on such journeys, don't they? The thing I'd like to ask about is that kind of incremental improvement. So you had this concept, I can make videos, you set yourself a target of one a week. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what did you find most difficult about that? And why did you choose one a week? Like, there were probably a few weeks when you're like, I'm not doing it, or
Yeah.
something came up. Um, how tricky were those early days? And what was the feedback that you initially got from it?
It it was really tricky early on because I started I started the channel, and I think maybe a month after I started the channel, I was headed to Bali to get married and then backpack for 5 months.
Hey, babe, welcome to life with me. I'm just going to
Yeah.
work the whole time.
Yeah. So, I mean, the reason for the one per week was just consistency, kind of giving myself a challenge and sticking to it. And I don't remember if I gave myself an official timeline. I just said, hey, one a week, that seems manageable. I could, when I'm making a tutorial video, unless things go really sideways, I try to finish all of the editing and everything on the video in a day.
Okay.
Um, and so I figured, okay, well, I could probably manage to do this. And so I started basically whatever topic I felt like covering. And it was on the road, so I just kind of had to work with what I had. I had my camera there, I had a laptop, and I would just kind of splice it together as it came along. Um, Traveling, you never know what kind of internet connection you're going to get. That was always a pain.
Mhm.
Also, you're limited in terms of, at the time, it's not like I could order hardware and get that delivered to Vietnam or something,
Mhm.
So I had to default to either explaining certain concepts or using an app or
Mhm.
something on my, a program on my computer or something like that. So I was kind of limited in content there. But it it started to come together relatively well. I mean, early on, there weren't many people watching, right? Like I was excited when I started to get a comment or two, and I would respond to every single one on
Mm.
every video,
Mm.
because there were so few to deal with. I can't remember how long it took to get 100 subscribers, but that was a
That's a good point. What do you think it was roughly to get to 100 subscribers, and how many videos did you produce when you were getting, I don't know, 10 views? I mean, just in terms
yeah.
of like that initial traction. I know it's
Oh, it
only
was
human nature to look at the stats, right?
yeah. It
And many
was
people might
months.
well give up. They might do,
Yeah.
yeah. Just how quickly did it kick off? Do you think?
It was months before I had 100 subscribers. Like it took a long time, and I think uh, near the end of the year, maybe the beginning of 2017, somewhere in there, I got to 1,000. Now I had the benefit. The timing of starting a Bitcoin YouTube channel in a bear market when there just wasn't much of that type of material in terms of educational content and actual tutorials,
Hmm.
that helped majorly, right? Because when 2017 hit and we jumped into this bull market, and all of a sudden you had people around the world going, oh, holy crap, how do I do this?
Yeah. What is
I
this
already
thing?
had a year of material sitting
Yeah.
there, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So that, I suppose, that low time preference of me believing that, well, Bitcoin is, the halving is happening this year as I'm starting it. Or yeah, it was happening in 2016 as I was kind of starting the channel, or had just happened. And I believe that lots of people would eventually be using Bitcoin. So it'd be useful to have some of these videos. And so having that, people aren't watching yet, but they will. Having that catalog of, oh, here's how to use this wallet, here's how to use this, already at my disposal when people started looking in early 2017, was integral to kind of growing over the course of that year. And then again, when we jump back into a bear market in 2018, I figured, well, I got a few years to wait here probably, but I'll just keep at it. I'll make content for the people that are sticking around and find it valuable, and which was awesome. But then when the newcomers come in, there'll be plenty for them to sort through. So I just kept at it, man.
And so I'm intrigued in terms of the the type of person that is coming and consuming your content. Do you think they go back to like video one and go through the whole back catalog, or and just in terms of like user behavior in a sense, or customer behavior type thing. Because to me, that it's an obvious, another thing we haven't touched on yet. Part of Bitcoin's design is this proof of work concept,
Mhm.
and the reason that people have value or hold value in this cryptocurrency is because of the way that it's created, and there's a proof of work that's gone into it with all of the Bitcoin mining, etc., and the electricity and blah blah blah. Without diving into that particular hole too much, a content library like you're describing is, in a sense, proof of work. It's like,
Mhm.
I sat down and have worked all this stuff out, and I've now made it completely free for you to come and have a look at all of it.
Mhm.
And it, in a sense, I guess, helps prove that you're in some ways, got some expertise in the space, but also is helpful to build some kind of rapport with any potential viewer, because you've gone and done the work basically.
Mhm.
And that's particularly cool because no one's asked you to do that. This is
Mhm.
completely off your own bat, and you go, I think I can do this better than what's currently going on, and here's the proof. So well done. I think there'll be, I had a
Thanks, man.
brief look. Your YouTube channel has how many subscribers now?
I think I'm closing in on actually 69,000.
Ah, there you go. I mean, how incredible. Well done. What a journey it must have been to get to today. And so what this means is you're able to finance your life, finance your
Yeah.
family, be your own boss.
Mhm.
How do you think, I mean, Bitcoin's obviously played a massive part in enabling that.
Mhm. Yeah.
But as someone who traveled a lot and was obviously interested in seeing the world and being independent, how does that feel? And, how much has Bitcoin had a place in that?
I have in my life never been happier than right this
Well
moment.
done. That's an awesome
Um,
stop
it's yeah, yeah.
there.
It's honestly, I multiple times per week I sit back and I think, how in the hell has all of this come to fruition to allow me to do something I'm very passionate about, um, travel the world, both both with my family, just casually, and with work, and see all these amazing places, and then have this incredible ability to allow time for myself to be healthy, and have that low time preference around, like, oh, I get to go to the gym every day. I get to work from home, and then I
Mm,
also have time to spend with my family, and watch my kids grow up, and take my kids to places to see the world, and kind of
mhm.
open their minds to different ways of living. And um, I don't know how this would have been possible. I suppose it could have been possible in different ways, but the transformation in my life since getting into Bitcoin has been very surprising, I guess. It shouldn't be surprising in retrospect, because it you know
You've done the
you
work. You did the work. Hell yeah.
well,
You're living.
and
You're
I
living
learned.
that the benefits of that incremental change.
I think part of it is, you do the work, but you learn the lessons in order to encourage you to do more of the work, right? You learn the habits, the low time preference habits. And so you start with finances. Like, we were talking about, early life. I had no financial background whatsoever. um I was terrible with money, even through my early 20s, because I had zero education around that. You get out of high school, you don't know how to pay bills or manage a budget or anything like that. And if unless you
It's hilarious in
explicitly,
a sense, isn't it? Well
oh,
done. You
it's
finished education out in the real world. Hang on.
yeah,
What do I do with money?
yeah, yeah. It's laughable how ill prepared myself and every other person is when you get out of high school, which is supposed to be the foundation of your life knowledge.
Mm,
Um, yeah, so and on top of that, like, I had, my parents were not super well off. Like, when we moved cross country, it was, my mom wanted to move closer to my sister, but then my dad had to kind of uproot his career and start over fresh in Calgary. And we were not doing particularly well those first few years. Like, I remember times when we couldn't afford groceries, and my aunt would bring us over a load of groceries, and my mom would be crying because she was thankful, but also was sad that she couldn't afford it. Or I had my allowance that I was saving towards a bike, and eventually it was the option between taking my saved allowance and buying groceries, or us not eating. And which I found out after the fact much later. And I don't fault my parents for that, because we got to eat. But also I think that subconsciously had an impact on me of, oh, this is the thanks that you get, or this is what you get for working and saving. And I think that kind of was deeply rooted inside me for an extended period of time, until I encountered Bitcoin, and I was able to undo kind of the mental workings that went on to form those habits.
Wow. So if I could break that down a little bit, your experience as a younger child, you tried to save and it didn't work, basically, and that carried through right till your 20s, and until you found Bitcoin, essentially. Well, that sounds tough, and good on your parents for getting through that process, and well done for getting to today. It's amazing what people do with their lives. I'm so blown away by that the whole time. The challenges people face, the difficulties that they overcome, and in particular, and this is why I'm so passionate about talking about Bitcoin, is it radicalizes people. Radicalize the wrong word. It revolutionizes people's lives. Radicalized sounds like you've turned to some kind of terrorist. Excuse me, that's not what
my
I'm
government might agree with that assessment.
Bitcoin Sessions, the Bitcoin terrorist.
No,
but I love that phrase. I've never been happier. So what does the future have in store? I'm intrigued on a number of levels. First of all, the process you've been through on a personal level, where you feel like you can make a statement, "I've never been happier." Well, that's achievable to anyone, right? You've done the work. You did the research, you started creating content, you brought your skills to the table, and boom, here we are today. We're at an extraordinary time in that, let's say 5% of the world has adopted Bitcoin. And that's probably double what it actually is, maybe even more, maybe 5 times, maybe only 1%.
Yeah.
That means 95% of humans globally can potentially go through the transformation that you've experienced. And also 95% of the world needs teaching about this particular process. So how do you see this playing out? How do we educate those 95% of people? How do we reach them on a level that they're going to understand and chime with? And some are visual learners, some will just copy the dance teacher straight away. Everyone's very different. So I guess it's kind of 2 questions in a sense. Like, how do we get this message through to the next 95%? And what do we think will happen as a result of them going through this kind of self-actualization process that you've experienced?
So in terms of being able to educate people, again, my personal experience is it's a case-by-case basis, which is not, it's not an ideal situation, but that's life, and that's how the world works, right? It's you have to look, teaching somebody is as much about asking questions as it is about conveying the information to them, right? You need feedback from them in order to teach effectively. And so I hope that as Bitcoiners, we can start down that pathway of understanding the people we are teaching, because there is no blanket way to do it. Some people will look at my stuff and find it useful, and I'm very thankful for that. But other people learn in totally different ways. And so, like, for example, some people can read a blog and they get all the information. They're like, okay, I got it. Or listen to a podcast and have somebody explain it, and just audio, you're set. Other people need that visual element. Other people need more kind of tailored, hands-on experience. Like I'm just starting to dabble in traveling workshops, right? So I'm going to go to a few major cities, and I have to limit how many people can come, because if it gets too large, then you don't get that kind of personalized, like, hey, what are you having problems with? Let's navigate it. But some people do need it's not just a visual thing, but they need that reassurance of like, okay, now, yeah, do that. You're doing it right. Yep. Keep going. Um, so the answer to that is how do we teach all these people in a case by case basis, or funnel them to content that will be tailored to their method of learning.
Mm.
That's kind of the best thing that you can do. Now, what will be the result of this? I would hope, and I do believe, that it will result in people gravitating towards uh, creating value for others, but deriving value from that for themselves as well. Um, it will result in people thinking for the future, because it's, the first time in quite some time that people can do that with their money. But it will kind of it will extrapolate out to other aspects of their life, I think, as it has for me.
Mm.
I learned to be financially sound. I became better at, creating a cash flow and saving and uh, deciding where I want to place my time and capital and my earnings and savings. Where do I want that allocated? I became better at that. But then I also took those lessons of low time preference and applied them to health, and applied them to, my diet, my exercise, applied them to my family. I want to spend time with my family. So, I mean, I won't say specifically, but today I basically got a full-time job offer from a company that, a couple of years ago I was very much looking to work for, and
Mm-hmm.
I love them. But I turned it down because I love what I'm doing right now, and I think if I did too much all at once, it would take away from my work life balance. And I can always look at it from the perspective of, oh, I can earn more money, but I'm now in the place where I'm like, but do I need it, or do I want to
Mm-hmm.
travel with my family and be healthy
Mm-hmm.
and have a good balance where I have enough money to be happy? And
Mm.
that's where I'm at right now. I turned down a job that I would have jumped at a couple of years ago, because I'm perfectly happy where I am right now.
I mean, yeah, cool spot. Well done. I think this will happen a lot, frankly, as other people, start to adopt Bitcoin. And a key part of all of that is that the value that you've generated up to this point in your life, whatever percentage of your net wealth is in Bitcoin, that total value in today's fiat terms is going to grow over time.
Mhm.
So wind back 10 years before you found out about Bitcoin in 2013, and you might have, I'll just use an example. You've got 50 grand in the bank, and
Mhm.
you're working for someone, or you've got your own entrepreneurial thing going on that's generating a bit of income, and then your dream job comes along. Well, you're going to take the dream job because you've only got 50 grand, and that 50 grand is disintegrating over time.
Yeah.
Whereas now you might have 50 grand in Bitcoin, and that 50 grand might be worth $500,000 in 4 years' time. It
Mhm.
might not, but it might. And
Yeah.
that completely changes your decision making process on how you generate an income for your family and
Mhm.
what you do with your time. And whoa, it's very powerful. Um, I had an idea. So I worked in the startup space for a long time. And what you were talking about um, just sparked a concept. This idea that to educate people effectively, you want to do it on a case by case basis. I really love
Mhm.
that. And digital products are excellent at potentially helping with that.
Mhm.
I wonder if it's a case of like you listen first, who is said potential customer? Who are they? How do they learn? Are they a visual learner? Are they a reader? And you could
Mhm.
build a kind of like a filtering process to understand what type of learner this person was.
Yeah.
Then once you understand who they are and what their case represents, you direct them into other content producers. So someone might go on and be like, I'm a visual learner, I want to know about a node. And you're like, right, Bitcoin Sessions, bang.
Mhm.
Or it might be, someone who listens to things, and you send them off to like a popular podcast that listen to someone in a space they're interested in. Um, you obviously have a YouTube channel. I imagine that's the main driver of value for you as a content producer. How
Mhm.
do you see tools in the space improving over time? Is there a threat from platform being deplatformed? Um, obviously, big concept at the moment with Elon Musk purchasing Twitter, etc. Yeah, I mean, just any thoughts on how digital products might change that education process, and equally, just any comments on what it's like to be, at a sense, disposable by YouTube.
Yeah.
They switch you off.
Yeah. That's always a big worry. And I think, that's probably my number one threat right now is
Hmm.
being deplatformed in that sense, in that, um, like my income, like the model that works right now is me reaching out to companies that I like and respect and having them as a sponsor on the show. And that's more or less, it pays the bills, and it is, we'll say, more decentralized than having a paycheck from a singular company that
Salary,
you
yeah.
work for, right? So you're more resistant to potential threat there. But the number one threat would be YouTube basically booting the channel. I've had a couple scares with that. They were just algorithmic mess ups, but
Mhm.
nonetheless, they give you a mild heart attack. Um,
I bet.
yeah,
Fuck. Can't log
yeah,
in.
pretty much. Yeah. Um, so in terms of that, in terms of like the content itself, uh, the content will live on regardless. I have everything backed up. There's better, kind of more resilient solutions out there, like Bitcoin TV, like bitcoin.tv, I think is the website. Um, where they host their own servers and everything like that, which is great, but it cuts off a lot of audience, right? It cuts off newcomers because the network effects are a bit of a bitch, right?
Yep.
If when everybody's on YouTube, you're trying to capture that audience, you're trying to capture the new people that haven't been exposed to Bitcoin yet and look up, how do I get a wallet? Well, they're not going to go to Bitcoin TV.
TV. Yeah.
Well, maybe in the future they will, and I hope so. But their first inclination is, I'm going to go to the platform that everybody uses and has all of the content, and just search, how do I use a Bitcoin wallet? So I think over time, we'll see if that improves. I think it would have to get really, really bad on YouTube for that to significantly improve, or they would have to ban all Bitcoin content, which would be devastating initially. But then people would just go to other platforms for that.
Mm.
In terms of other tools, I will say that the educational space in Bitcoin has improved by orders of magnitude since I started.
Mm.
When I first started making educational videos, it was tough. It was tough trying to navigate understanding Bitcoin, even just from a kind of like a higher viewpoint of kind of getting the general idea of what it did, and it wasn't well explained. Now we have so many different types of content. You've got a lot of great kind of analytical, what is Bitcoin and what does it mean for society, and how does it actually work, and how does it differ from the legacy financial system, and what's wrong with the Fed, and you have all of that content. You have people covering industry news regularly. You have great interviews all the time. You have people, not just myself, that are making tons of YouTube tutorials and video tutorials or blog tutorials that are very well organized. There's just so much out there, and I'm so happy to see it. And the beautiful thing about a lot of that content, particularly like specifically Bitcoin, is that the message is very cohesive around it. And when you start dabbling in the quote unquote crypto space, the message is all over the place. There's
Mm.
no, oh yeah, it's for this. Oh wait, no, it's for this. Well, now we're kind of pivoting. It's for this, and these other things also do that. And that's because Bitcoin can't do that. Oh wait, now it can do that. So maybe it's this instead. So you don't get a consistent message when you start dabbling in a lot of the crypto space. But with Bitcoin, you have like this is what it does. You can build other stuff on top of it, but this is kind of like the core ethos of what we're trying to achieve here. And the philosophy behind that, it gets, I think, for newcomers coming into the space now, this past couple of years in particular, I've never really seen it before, but I see people coming into quote unquote crypto and almost immediately finding the signal and switching over to Bitcoin only. And I hadn't seen that before these last couple of years. And I think that's because there wasn't the content to support it. But I think now people are honing into that signal and going, oh, this is actually cohesive and this makes sense. So I think I'm going to go down this path. And they very quickly kind of realize some of the cracks in the armor of some of these other things, and see the promise and kind of the anti-fragility of Bitcoin for what it is early on, which is an impressive feat of the other Bitcoin content creators out there, because there's no shortage of noise when you first get in here. And it just means that their signal must be exceptionally strong to have people gravitate that quickly.
Well, I mean, the Bitcoin education content being orders of magnitude better is thanks to people like yourself. So,
Thanks, man.
it's you're right. It's so important, that process of like, okay, well, what is this crypto stuff? Okay, well, which one do I really need to focus on first, and why is it important to me and my family? And if that was previously like a 5-year cycle to like drop all other crypto and focus on Bitcoin as your store of value or your reserve asset or whatever you want to describe it, that's now shortened to say, 6 months or 6 weeks, or who knows what that process is. It's different for everyone. I think there's like multidisciplinary skill sets that often are required for people to understand, that's why this is important, or experiences in their life is probably a better way of saying it, rather than some kind of, high level kind of academic term. But listen, Ben, this has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. Is there any final comments that you have before we say goodbye?
I would say, again, I've said it a couple times in the conversation, but for those out there that are kind of in the process of chatting with a friend or a family member, somebody and you're trying to kind of introduce them to Bitcoin, don't throw everything in the kitchen sink at them right away. Again, I want you to try and focus on that low time preference, and give them tiny tasks. Say, here's a book, read it, come back, ask me some questions. Okay, you want to try? Here's a simple wallet. Just start with that, and then we'll just kind of leave it, and give them small attainable tasks over time. They don't have to do it all at once, and lead them down that path of being that self-sovereign Bitcoiner, and see how far you can get them without having to throw it all right away.
Well, that's great advice. I often wonder what the best way to orange pill my entire family is, and I think that's probably a good way of thinking about it. Another concept I kind of had is always just to think about, what problem does Bitcoin solve for this person, because it solves lots of different problems. And this is what I did a lot in startups. It's like, what is the problem you've got, or the customer's got, and why is your solution 10 times better, 10 times cheaper, 10 times faster than what's currently on the market, and why are they going to pay you for it? And so that kind of problem distillation process, when you reapply to Bitcoin adoption, is like, okay, well, what problem does this person face? Now, if they're in a part of the world where they don't have a bank, well, they're the unbanked, and that's going to help them massively. They might be someone in a hyperinflation environment, and therefore storing their value is helpful. You name it, right? We know all these discussions. Well, thank you so much for your time, Ben. I really appreciate it. Where can people get hold of you if they want to get in touch?
So I'm very active on Twitter. So just at BTC Sessions, you can find me there. And then YouTube, you can just search BTC Sessions. You'll find me there. And then I do have a website, and that has kind of links to everything, blog, podcast, all that kind of stuff. And actually my in-person workshops and stuff like that. And that's just btcsessions.ca. And that's it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. It's been a wonderful journey, and take care. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.